Imagine leaving everything behind in search of a purpose that could change not just lives but hearts. What if a simple act of kindness was the beginning of a transformation no one believed possible? Meet the story of someone who had the courage to follow their own truth, even when everything seemed against him. What makes someone trade comfort for uncertainty for those who have no voice? Prepare to be moved. One decision. Shelter. A journey that will inspire your faith in humanity. Ethan Cole was never an ordinary person, but he spent his life trying to seem like one. He grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, in a working-class neighborhood surrounded by wide streets and ancient oaks whose branches touched the sky, casting welcoming shadows on cracked sidewalks. The only child of a public school teacher and a local police officer, he learned early on the value of respect, effort, and especially the attentive eye for details others overlooked. His childhood was a mosaic of small acts of care: warming milk for newborn kittens that miraculously appeared in the yard, rescuing injured birds, building makeshift huts in the backyard to shelter them during summer storms. Ethan was the type who preferred the quiet company of a stray dog to the noise of teenage parties. On his street, every animal had a name given by him, and every story of abandonment was, to Ethan, a call to action. As he entered adulthood, life demanded urgency. Business school seemed like the logical choice, driven by the pursuit of financial stability that would make his parents proud. And Ethan didn't disappoint. He graduated among the top of his class, quickly joined a major marketing firm in Atlanta, and was leading teams and national projects before turning 30. In the corporate world, Ethan built a reputation for efficiency, ethics, and competence. He was the kind of leader who listened more than he spoke, preferring straightforward, discreet conversations over grandstanding speeches. He handled pressure, deadlines, and inflated egos well, but never fully fit in. When the office lights dimmed and he returned to his modern, silent apartment, reality weighed differently. There was a void, a feeling that something essential was slipping away. Over time, the small acts of kindness from his childhood persisted, even amid the hectic routine. It wasn't unusual for him to be late for meetings because he was helping an injured animal on the street or spending weekends participating in adoption drives. Co-workers laughed at Ethan's dedication to the city strays. To many, it was just an eccentricity, a harmless distraction amid corporate chaos. To him, these moments were breaths of truth in a world that felt increasingly artificial. Physically, Ethan didn't stand out much, but he carried a quiet presence. He was of medium build, with broad shoulders and hands marked by calluses, the result of hours spent carrying bags of food and building enclosures at the community shelter on the outskirts. His brown hair, always unruly, seemed to defy the corporate environment's rigidity. His green eyes were perhaps his most striking feature, not just for their color but for the way they radiated empathy, weariness, and a persistent hope. The stubble and lines on his face showed early maturity. Unlike his suit-clad colleagues, he almost always chose worn jeans and simple t-shirts, even on the company's casual Fridays. He hated showing off. Behind this seemingly ordinary figure lived thousands of stories. Ethan was the confidant of friends, the present son, the weekend volunteer, the helpful co-worker who assisted without expecting recognition. But only a few knew of the restlessness that dwelled within him. A persistent voice that, despite professional achievements, he was living a half-life. What no one knew was how much this restlessness was about to transform completely. On a regular night, on a dead-end street in Atlanta, an impulsive decision changed the course of his life. A choice driven by compassion was the starting point of an improbable project, creating a haven for rescued animals in a region marked by neglect and invisibility. And it was precisely this calling, not planned but felt deeply, that would transform Ethan forever, showing everyone that true courage is born when we decide to listen to what truly moves us. The turning point in Ethan's life happened on a cold November night, just before Thanksgiving. Returning home from another exhausting meeting, he noticed, for the third consecutive night, a hungry dog curled up beneath a park bench near his building. The animal's gaze, a mix of fear and resignation, echoed within Ethan in a way few career events ever did. That night, he didn't just feed the dog. He picked it up, improvised a bed in his living room, and spent hours beside the animal, trying to calm its trembling. During the early hours, sleep eluded Ethan. Despite the warmth of the heating and the distant hum of the city, he was consumed by a profound restlessness. That feeling of having to do something, of not being able to ignore the glaring reality before him. In the following days, Ethan began to notice the absurd number of abandoned animals throughout the city. It wasn't an isolated case. It was a silent epidemic. According to municipal data, Atlanta had over 40,000 stray dogs and cats, many sick, injured, utterly invisible to the hurried pedestrians. Though trying to maintain his professional routine, Ethan felt uniquely affected. Fatigue increased, productivity slipped. It showed in the small details: irritation with simple tasks, distraction in meetings, the guilt for every animal he couldn't help. His colleagues began remarking, jokingly at first, then with discomfort, that Ethan wasn't all there anymore. His best friend, Ben, tried to warn him. "Man, you need a break. You can't save all of Atlanta's dogs, you know." The sentence, said out of concern, resonated in Ethan's mind not as advice but as a personal challenge. The conflict quickly spilled over from work. His mother noticed the fatigue, the distant gaze. His social life, which was already not very lively, became nearly non-existent. He began to spend weekends feeding stray animals, visiting temporary homes, seeking information about NGOs, talking to veterinarians and anonymous volunteers. Every spare dollar was funneled into food, medicine, veterinary consultations. Ethan saw no more sense in buying new clothes, dining at fine restaurants, or traveling on vacations. His happiness now boiled down to small victories: a rescued animal, a completed adoption, a successful health treatment. However, such extreme dedication brought along unwanted consequences. Friends gradually distanced themselves, claiming Ethan only talked about animals, about abandonment, about suffering. Loneliness deepened. When someone invited him out, he declined politely, but his mind and heart were no longer in sync with those trivialities of his old life. At home, his routine turned into a sequence of tasks dedicated to the new resident, now named Miles, the rescued dog. Handling waste, cries, fears, treatments. It all required enormous emotional energy. Internally, Ethan began to feel divided. Part of him wanted to give up, to throw in the towel. He felt swallowed by a problem too big for one man. Yet another part refused to quit. The feeling of helplessness mixed with frustration. No matter how much he did, there was always another animal crying for help. The silence of the apartment intensified an internal dialogue, increasingly intense and painful. At work, the pressure mounted. His superiors demanded results, and he even considered resigning. Several managers suggested vacations, therapy, even a transfer to another department. However, the more he heard advice to return to normal, the heavier the burden on his chest felt. Ethan sensed that returning to normal meant ignoring who he had truly become. The emotional abyss also took a toll on his health. Chronic insomnia set in, sudden weight loss, relentless back and headaches, anxiety attacks, and at times, clear signs of depression. Sleepless nights, silent cries, loss of appetite. Close friends were concerned. Ben, his childhood friend, made one last attempt. What if you tried to balance things? You can't save the world. But for Ethan, this was no longer a choice. It was a mission. The breaking point came when he found an injured cat hit by a car near work. Despite all improvised care, the animal didn't survive. It shattered Ethan in an irreversible way. He found himself staring at his reflection in the veterinary office glass. Who am I? He wondered, feeling he no longer recognized the old Ethan. Faced with the choice of embracing this calling or continuing to live a life that no longer made sense, Ethan was struck by a decision: either change everything or lose himself. At the peak of conflict, between career obligations and the call of compassion, he realized that resisting his truth was a slow demise. That's when Ethan decided to risk everything for the improbable, to create, with his own resources and scant experience, a real shelter for forgotten animals. But no one imagined that this choice would bring even greater challenges, both material and emotional. Starting a shelter from scratch in a community marked by neglect, without assured support, almost without resources, Ethan was about to face the greatest test of his life. When he decided to establish a shelter for rescued animals, Ethan Cole plunged into an unknown world, full of uncertainties, sleepless nights, and brutal learning experiences. The decision wasn't sudden, but rather a response to a deafening void, the kind of unsettling silence that settles in when life points to an unavoidable destiny. The morning after the cat's death, Ethan woke up changed. He still carried the grief and guilt, but now there was a spark of decision in his eyes. On a notebook page, he began scribbling ideas. What do I need to create a shelter? He listed everything he could think of: land, food, medications, shelters, volunteers, veterinary support, local licensing. At first, it seemed like an insane task for someone with no experience and no capital. But that raw energy of someone who had let go of all fears was what propelled him. The first concrete step was to seek similar stories. He watched documentaries, read blogs, binge-watched videos of independent small protectors across the country. He mapped NGOs in Atlanta, visited overcrowded community shelters, took notes, learned about legislation, civil responsibility, and sanitation protocols. He contacted veterinarians and university researchers. Always respectful, he listened more than he spoke, noting every piece of advice, every mistake, every success shared by those already in the fight. Money, of course, was a problem. What was left of his manager's salary barely covered the initial cost of renting a small warehouse on the city's outskirts. Still, Ethan made a promise to himself. He would give up temporary comfort in exchange for definitive purpose. He sold his car, used his savings, and took part of a personal loan. While the family lamented the waste, and some friends deemed him impulsive, Ethan spread his idea on social media, blending naivety with courage. If anyone wants to help, even a small donation can make a difference in these animals' lives. From the very first day, challenges seemed larger than dreams. Finding a space to rent that allowed housing dogs and cats was a drama in itself. Owners feared dirt, noise, and damage to the property. After weeks of searching, Ethan found a rundown site 20 minutes from downtown. A forgotten place, surrounded by tall grass and abandoned warehouses, ideal for those needing a fresh start. Alone, he cleaned every room, rebuilt fences, improvised kennels from wood scraps and recycled materials. He spent sleepless nights building doghouses from pallets and crates. He learned the hard way to fix leaks, paint walls, dig trenches, install simple drainage systems. The start was precarious. Old mattresses lined the floor, and the first supplies were donations collected from acquaintances. The strong smell, the barking of scared dogs, the meowing of frightened cats, all mixed into a work routine that began before dawn and ended only after the last medication was given. Amidst the chaos, the first lights began to appear. An elderly neighbor showed up, curious, offering old blankets and homemade food. A local university group approached Ethan to volunteer on Saturdays. Sympathetic veterinarians started offering free consultations, vaccination drives, and even basic spaying procedures. Social media gained strength. The first stories with videos of rescued animals went viral within small city circles. Each completed adoption was celebrated as a collective trophy. Ordinary people began to surface, bringing everything from bags of food to monetary donations. Even with still improvised infrastructure, Ethan insisted on caring for each animal with dignity. Baths, medication, affection, a routine of attention that helped them regain trust in humans. Small victories became the driving force to keep going. An elderly dog adopted by a lonely young woman. A blind puppy rescued from the streets, finding a family unfazed by its disability. Injured cats receiving treatment, returning to life with health and dignity. Despite growth, the shelter faced daily crises. Donations fluctuated drastically. There were weeks of abundance followed by absolute shortage. Ethan spent nights worrying about how to feed everyone the next morning. Sanitary problems, animal fights, rat and cockroach invasions were common. The prejudice from locals required a lot of patience. Many saw Ethan as a dangerous lunatic, a hoarder, or a threat to neighborhood order. Bureaucratic pressures stole Ethan's sleep. Municipal inspectors, strict sanitation requirements, fees for regularization. Energy, water, and rent bills seemed to grow every week. On a personal level, the cost was high. Old relationships wilted completely. His mother, concerned, called every day. "Son, you're destroying yourself over this." Ethan tried to explain, but deep down knew he was isolating everyone around him. His health took its toll. He developed nervous gastritis, lost even more weight, had insomnia and anxiety attacks. The fatigue was visible. His face increasingly marked by time. Yet, each morning, the challenge of looking into those eyes pleading for help was what fueled him. It was as if, no matter how unbearable the weight, new hope always emerged. As months passed, Ethan learned through pain and love. He saw animals die but also witnessed transformations that only constant dedication can bring. Animals once aggressive slowly softened through affection. Skittish cats learning to purr in laps. People touched by the story of the rescued, changing their own behaviors. And then, almost a year later, Ethan looked around and realized that, despite everything, he had created something real. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a refuge. There, every animal scar was also a human scar being healed. But the greatest test was yet to come. A crisis that would threaten not only the project's future but Ethan's own ability to believe in himself and the value of his mission. Ethan's shelter had already overcome days of scarcity, weeks of storms, prejudice, and loneliness, but nothing compared to what was about to happen at the onset of that summer when everything, literally everything, teetered on the brink of collapse. It all started with an urgent phone call on a stifling July morning. 2 volunteers reported strange symptoms in several dogs: high fever, vomiting, and lethargy. In less than a day, the number of sick animals tripled. The shelter, already operating at its limits, turned into a battlefront against the suspected outbreak of distemper. Veterinarians rushed to help but quickly confirmed the worst. A highly contagious disease was circulating. Ethan was immediately faced with a devastating decision. He needed to isolate animals, suspend rescues, and cancel all adoption visits, the main source of hope and relief for the shelter. The news spread. Neighbors who were already wary of the shelter doubled down on their prejudice. "This disease will infest the neighborhood. This place can't go on. Someone needs to shut it down." Municipal authorities appeared to inspect the site. They demanded documents, reports, vaccination protocols. Within hours, the entire city seemed to conspire to destroy Ethan's efforts. A deluge of bureaucracy, fear, and accusations. The shelter faced a real risk of being shut down, and Ethan could lose everything he fought for, including the animals themselves, which, if seized by the public sector, would surely be euthanized in overcrowded shelters. Ethan fought with all his strength. He argued with officials, pleaded for more time, presented medical histories, documents, photos, reports. He sought help from NGOs, made appeals on social media, recorded emotional videos requesting donations and sharing the truth of his ordeal. The once active volunteer body was now reduced to a minimum. Many had distanced themselves due to fear of the illness. Resources were lacking for medicine, alcohol, syringes, dressings, even the basics, food and cleaning supplies. In the depths of despair, Ethan spent 3 days and nights without sleep. He fed the sick animals hourly, administered medication, sanitized every inch of the shelter, and constantly spoke with veterinarians, trying new protocols. His face betrayed deep shadows under his eyes. His arms were scratched and bruised from racing against time. There was no moment for a decent meal or shower. All he could do was endure. In the midst of chaos, the temptation to give up loomed. Ethan held the gate keys, contemplating walking away, imagining for an instant what it would be like to pretend none of this was his concern. In that moment, at the peak of exhaustion, standing at the shelter's gate at sunset, with heavy clouds above and a city obliviously distant, Ethan knelt, quietly crying, and for the first time doubted himself. What if I simply can't handle it? What if I lose them all? It was precisely there, when all seemed lost, that the improbable occurred. A young local veterinarian, frustrated with government negligence, vented on social media about Ethan's shelter situation. The post went viral. People from all over Atlanta began to reach out. Donations poured in: money, medicines, cleaning supplies. A spontaneous volunteer effort was organized, and even protectors from neighboring cities traveled to help. In less than 48 hours, the shelter received food, vaccines, new hands, and above all, an unexpected wave of solidarity. Energy was renewed, and Ethan realized he was no longer alone. But that day, his heart didn't settle until sunset, when volunteers, students, neighbors, and strangers completed a thorough cleaning of the shelter, and the last critical animal, a little dog named Hope, finally opened her eyes after 2 days unconscious. Holding Hope in his arms, feeling her warm, still fragile body, Ethan understood. This was the moment where the journey changed in meaning, filled with purpose. Failure, pain, and loneliness didn't matter. That night, Ethan learned that true compassion can indeed move the world. Ethan's shelter had survived days of lack, storms, prejudice, isolation, and exhaustion. But nothing prepared him for the beginning of that summer when everything, literally everything, was on the brink of collapse. It was a sweltering morning. The sun had barely risen when a desperate call from one of the volunteers jolted Ethan out of bed. Dogs and cats, once lively, now lay listless in their makeshift shelters, some feverish, others in pain. Within hours, the shelter became a battlefield against an invisible disease. A sudden wave of fever, vomiting, and lethargy, later confirmed as an aggressive distemper outbreak. Fear took hold. Ethan had to quickly close the gates, suspend all rescues, and heartbreakingly inform families that adoptions needed to wait. The news of the outbreak spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had been indifferent now looked on with suspicion, some even hostile. fearing the disease might escape the shelter and threaten their homes. Cruel comments emerged. People suggested or demanded the shelter be shut down immediately. City inspectors showed up requesting documentation, health reports, vaccination protocols. Everything felt like it was trembling. His shelter, every animal, every brick and handmade fence. The possibility of shutdown loomed like a dark cloud. If the animals were seized by authorities, they would likely be euthanized, victims of overcrowded public shelters. Resources vanished, and volunteers pulled back out of fear. Ethan found himself alone, feeding each sick animal hourly, cleaning up waste and vomit on the dirt floors, struggling to maintain hygiene under nearly impossible conditions. He used the remaining medicines with extreme caution, following veterinarians' guidance over the phone, creating makeshift spreadsheets to track symptoms, organizing shifts and priorities. There was no time to think about himself. He barely slept. His eyes sunk deeper with exhaustion, shoulders hunched from the burden and unbearable pressure of being the last hope for such fragile beings. In the solitude of over 70 hours without rest, doubt crept in. For a moment, as the night enveloped the shelter cast in fear, he paused at the already rusty gate, keys in hand, eyes filled with tears. What if it had all been a mistake? What if he simply couldn't withstand it, and everyone there paid the price for his stubbornness? In the silence broken only by the sound of suffering animals, Ethan finally cried. Silent, huddled near the gate, he understood the true weight of compassion, loving so much it hurts, wanting so deeply to care that your soul cries for help. But in the darkest hours, the improbable happens. A young local vet, moved by Ethan's effort and frustrated by the situation, shared an honest account of the shelter's struggle on social media. Within hours, the post went viral. Strangers began calling, volunteers who had never been there offered to help with tasks, and donations of medicine, food, cleaning products, and money poured in from neighboring cities and even other states. Veterinarians from various neighborhoods stepped forward, bringing test samples, helping isolate animals, organizing emergency vaccination efforts. The energy transformed the environment. From a barn engulfed in fear and helplessness, the shelter filled with hands, hope, and the heartening sound of people working together. Donations increased hour by hour, and amidst the rush and exhaustion, Ethan felt a rare sensation he hadn't known in ages. Pure relief, genuine joy. When the last volunteer of the day left that night, handing over a tired-eyed little dog, ironically named Hope, Ethan held her for long moments. Hope's small, warm, fragile body, her eyes slowly opening after 2 days unconscious, became the symbol of everything Ethan had pursued from the beginning. Not just saving animals but proving that even in the darkest hours, one person's courage can awaken the compassion of a multitude. By the end of that night, sitting on the shelter floor with Hope asleep in his arms, surrounded by the calmer sounds of other dogs and cats, Ethan finally found a silent peace. He knew, in a different way now, that giving up was not an option. With a lighter heart, he gazed at the cloudy Atlanta sky, promising never again to doubt the power of love when living with genuine purpose. After that night that seemed to last a lifetime, something changed definitively within the shelter, and inside Ethan too. It wasn't just about overcoming the outbreak or the gradual return to health, nor even the unexpected support received from strangers. It was the silent transformation of every shelter routine, now marked by a collective feeling of hope and belonging. The days that followed were about rebuilding. The walls, which had served as makeshift barriers, were now painted a soft, almost cheerful color, thanks to donations from an old neighborhood factory. The strong disinfectant smell occasionally mingled with the aroma of freshly baked bread brought every morning by a lady, Mrs. Marjorie, like a silent blessing ritual for this refuge. The dogs and cats, one by one, received approval on their makeshift sheets, tails wagging, eyes calmer, tentative leaps of those learning to trust the world again. Ethan, thinner, watchful, arms marked by labor, realized his purpose wasn't just to survive but to thrive. He organized weekly meetings with the new volunteers, now a loyal and enthusiastic group. Tasks were divided. He taught what he learned on the fly, listened to suggestions from those more experienced. After months of carrying everything alone, he now learned to delegate, to trust, to rely on this makeshift web of solidarity. One of the deepest changes happened within him. The emptiness that gnawed at days and nights in corporate life, that constant restlessness, disappeared. In its place, a rare tranquility emerged, discreetly, the certainty of a path finally found. When he looked around, he saw not just makeshift shelters, but stories. He remembered Hope's eyes, Miles's first barks, the afternoons he watched animals learn, slowly, to lie down without fear. He learned that quitting is easy when you're alone, but impossible when you realize you belong to a greater purpose. The community, once skeptical, now brimmed with pride. Local children painted murals with drawings of rescued animals. A local market started donating food close to expiration. An adoption network was formed in partnership with small city stores. Ethan was also surprised by old friends, who, moved by the shelter's impact, reappeared to offer support. Even his mother, once so worried and hesitant, visited the shelter one sunny morning, bringing childhood memories and a smile Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. She walked among the kennels, petted puppies, and whispered almost proudly, "I think I finally understand why you never gave up." Counting each small victory of the day, Ethan realized how his perspective on success had shifted. It wasn't about the number of likes on social media or the few dollars trickling in from donations. It was, above all, the sparkle in the eyes of someone adopting an animal for the first time, a child's embrace of their new furry friend, the peace in knowing that, in that small corner of the world, lives truly mattered, regardless of species, appearance, or past. As the shelter grew stronger, its impact reached beyond its walls. People began visiting not just to adopt but to talk, heal, share stories and struggles. Ethan realized that by rescuing animals, he was also rescuing people. He himself was saved from the abyss of loneliness and guilt that almost consumed him. Months after the major outbreak, gathered at a fundraising party, surrounded by familiar and unfamiliar faces, Ethan found himself smiling effortlessly for the first time in years. Someone asked if he missed his old life, the hectic office days and unreachable targets. He paused, looked at Hope sleeping at his feet, felt the afternoon breeze carrying the sound of dogs playing in the yard, and replied with a genuinely relieved sigh, "Now, I only miss who I was when I didn't understand the greatness of what truly matters." That quiet night, with the shelter finally silent after a hectic day, Ethan sat by the window, watching the last city lights fade into the distance. The wind carried the familiar scent of damp earth, while all around the yard, dogs and cats slept safely, protected by walls and love that he once doubted were possible. Beside him, Hope breathed softly, and Ethan found himself stroking this fragile creature, so close to death weeks ago, now a symbol of everything saved from oblivion. It was there, in the silence, that he truly understood the extent of his transformation. It wasn't just about overcoming challenges or realizing dreams. It was about rescuing himself from his own shadows, the monotony of identical days, the paralyzing feeling of being neither sufficient nor needed. Ethan now understood that we are all, in some way, wounded creatures seeking refuge, a place of care, respect, and trust where we can lower our defenses and breathe deeply. He realized that no one changes the world alone, but no one is too insignificant to start. A single act of courage, however small, can be all that separates hope from despair, both for those who save and those who are saved. As he closed his eyes, he felt part of something bigger. A silent chain of compassion, of people who don't give up, who keep fighting when everything seems impossible. He finally understood that the greatest victory isn't measured in numbers, but in the quiet impact we leave on each life, in every eye that begins to shine again. And that night, Ethan wished everyone would know. The world will never change completely all at once, but there's always a shelter waiting for those who decide to act with heart. True rescue in the end happens in both directions, because in saving others we save ourselves.